This is the final lesson of the reproductive system and also the final lesson of Anatomy and Physiology 12. We are talking about the hormonal control of female reproduction. And this is a little more complicated than the male system because it relies on cycles of hormones that cause changes in the body throughout the month. Female hormone cycles are a monthly cycle, around 28 days, and there are two different cycles that are occurring concurrently at the same time. The ovarian cycle deals with the changes within the ovaries or the eggs themselves, and the uterine cycle describes what's happening to the walls and the lining of the uterus. Both of those last about 28 days, and in the middle, around day 14, is where that sort of break is at ovulation that releases the egg and then determines whether or not pregnancy will occur. We will come back to this graph a few times. It's an important one to know. You'll notice here that we're looking at 4 different hormones. So the follicular hormones or ovarian hormones are the LH and FSH. Remember that those are the gonadotropic hormones released by the anterior pituitary to stimulate the gonads, in this case the ovaries. Those 2 hormones both peak around ovulation and then level off again. They're responsible for the changes that go through a primary oocyte as it develops into a mature egg, is released, and then the formation of a corpus luteum. In the uterine cycle, we're looking at the hormones estrogen and progesterone as they change the thickness of the wall as it builds up to prepare for implantation. If implantation does not occur, then the end of the cycle results in a breakdown and release of the tissues from the uterus wall, which is what we call menstruation. So first up in the ovarian cycle, we're looking at the follicular phase. So this is the first half of the cycle that's occurring in the ovaries. FSH, or that follicle stimulating hormone, is secreted from the pituitary and stimulates the growth of several ovarian follicles. Now, a follicle is a sac that contains an immature egg, or oocyte. One of those oocytes will be dominant and will mature more quickly and begin to produce estrogen and progesterone. That then has an inhibitory effect on FSH secretion. There's a negative feedback loop, and it stops the other follicles from growing. So within an ovarian cycle, it's typically only one egg that matures and is released. At the same time, this follicular phase is happening, estrogen is acting on the uterus to stimulate the thickening of the endometrial layer. At the end of that first follicular phase is ovulation. Around day 12, estrogen spikes and promotes a surge in the hormones released from the pituitary gland. That positive feedback, where one action causes an increase in another action, results in a surge of both LH and FSH. The LH is what causes that dominant follicle to rupture. The sac then opens and releases an egg out of the ovaries, where it can then travel down the fallopian tubes for fertilization. And the final stage of the ovarian cycle is the luteal phase. This happens in the second half of the monthly cycle, where that ruptured follicle, that now empty sac, develops into a corpus luteum. Corpus luteum secretes progesterone and estrogen to act on the uterus to thicken the endometrial wall and prepare the body for pregnancy. Estrogen and progesterone both have an inhibitory effect on the pituitary gland hormones, FSH and LH. So no new follicles develop during this time. Here you can see the changes within the ovary. So here's the ovary itself. And here we're starting with these immature follicles or primary follicles that start to develop. One of them, the primary follicle, contains the most matured egg, or the egg that does eventually mature, into a fully developed ovum or egg. And then at ovulation, it is released. And then that follicle is retained and degenerates into this corpus luteum, which is a hormone secreting structure. Now, the uterine cycle, this is what's happening inside the uterus, starts with menstruation. So menstruation is actually the beginning of a new cycle. If pregnancy has not occurred from the previous cycle's ovulation, then the thickened endometrium will shed. It sloughs off the walls of the uterus and is passed out through the cervix as menstrual fluid. It's a drop in estrogen and progesterone that causes this menstrual bleeding. Following menstruation is the proliferative phase. So this is about a week where the remaining endometrium thickens and regenerates due to increased estrogen levels. So the wall becomes thick and soft, engorged with blood, and ready to receive the potentially fertilized egg. And then the second half of our uterine cycle, for 2 weeks from day 14 to 28, the endometrium continues to thicken and become more vascularized due to an increase in progesterone. All of that serves to prepare the lining to receive an implanted embryo. So looking here at the hormone levels, we can see that first this surge in estrogen is what causes the beginning of the thickening of the endometrium. It also relates to that ovulation spike, that spike here. And then the estrogen drops, but the progesterone starts to rise, and that's going to continue with the thickening endometrium in preparation for implantation. When both our female sex hormones drop, so here we have very low rate of estrogen and progesterone production, that's the beginning of menstruation. So menstruation occurs where estrogen and progesterone are low. Similar to the chart you filled in for the male hormones, there is a section in your textbook, page 446 to 449. You'll be filling in this with the source, where are these hormones coming from? The target, what are they acting on, and their action, what are they actually causing the body to respond with.